Chapter 1. The Mind's Hidden Blind Spots. Imagine driving down a long, familiar stretch of highway on a perfectly clear afternoon. The hum of the tires against the pavement is steady, the radio is playing softly in the background, and the traffic is light. You decide to change lanes. You perform the routine you have executed thousands of times before. You glance in your rearview mirror, you check your side mirror, and you see nothing but an empty stretch of asphalt. You hit your turn signal and gently begin to turn the steering wheel. Suddenly, a horn blares violently, so loud and close that it jolts your entire body. Adrenaline floods your system as you swerve back into your lane. Another car passes you, mere inches from your door. For a terrifying moment, your heart pounds in your chest as you try to comprehend what just happened. You check the mirrors. The lane was empty. How did a 2-ton machine materialize out of thin air? We are all familiar with the concept of a car's blind spot, that dangerous wedge of physical space that our mirrors simply cannot capture. We accept that our vehicles have design limitations, and we learn to turn our heads to check over our shoulders before making a move. But what we rarely pause to consider is that the human eye, the very biological instrument we rely on to navigate reality, comes with a structural blind spot of its own. Deep within the architecture of your eye, where the optic nerve connects to the retina to carry visual information to your brain, there is a tiny area completely devoid of light-sensitive receptors. It is a biological dead zone. If an image falls precisely onto this spot, your eye cannot see it. You possess a literal physical hole in your vision, yet as you look around the room right now, you do not see a dark, empty void hovering in your field of view. Your vision feels seamless, uninterrupted, and perfectly complete. How is this possible? It is possible because your brain is a master storyteller, a brilliant counterfeiter. When your brain receives the incomplete picture from your eyes, it refuses to present you with a blank space. Instead, it instantly assesses the surrounding colors, patterns, and light, and it literally paints over the whole. It fabricates the missing piece of reality so flawlessly and so quickly that you never even realize you are looking at an illusion. This magnificent, invisible trick of biology serves as the ultimate metaphor for the human mind. If our brain is willing to actively alter physical reality to give us a comfortable, seamless experience of sight, we must ask ourselves a profound question. What else is it painting over? We like to believe that our minds function like high-definition video cameras and flawless supercomputers, passively and accurately recording the world exactly as it is. We believe that our memories are perfect archives of the past, that our judgments are rooted in pure logic, and that our perceptions are unshakable truths. But human cognition does not work that way. Our minds are ancient, highly efficient prediction machines, forced to process millions of pieces of sensory and social information every single second. To prevent us from being utterly paralyzed by this avalanche of data, the brain relies on mental shortcuts. Think of these shortcuts as invisible glitches in the system. They are deeply ingrained habits of thought that allow us to make lightning-fast decisions, but they also lead to predictable, systematic errors in how we perceive the world. To understand how deep these mental glitches run, consider a deeply universal experience. Picture a chaotic Tuesday morning. You are running late, holding your keys in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. You rush out the front door, pull it shut, and hurry to your car. An hour later, sitting at your desk at work, a cold thought suddenly strikes you. Did I lock the front door? Instantly, your brain offers you a vivid mental video. You can actually see your own hand reaching out. You can feel the cold metal of the key. You can hear the distinct heavy click of the deadbolt sliding into place. You exhale, relieved, trusting the memory completely. But when you return home that evening, you find the door unlocked, swinging gently in the breeze. What happened in that moment at your desk? Did you simply guess? No. You experienced a genuine illusion of memory. The brain abhors a vacuum. When it searched its archives for the memory of locking the door that specific morning and found a blank space, it did not say, "I do not know." Instead, it retrieved the heavily worn, familiar file of every other day you had ever locked that door, and it played that footage for you as if it had just happened. Your brain generated a completely counterfeit memory to soothe your anxiety and save cognitive energy. It painted over the blind spot. We see these same glitches in how we interpret the present moment. Imagine walking alone through a quiet, densely wooded forest at twilight. The light is fading, casting long, deceptive shadows across the path. Suddenly you stop dead in your tracks. A few feet ahead, coiled in the dirt, is a snake. In a fraction of a second, your biology takes over, your pupils dilate, your breathing stops, your muscles tense, and you leap backward. Then, as your eyes adjust and you take a second look, the illusion shatters. It is not a snake at all. It is just a curved piece of an old, discarded rope. For those 3 seconds, however, that snake was entirely real to you. Your brain did not wait to gather all the objective facts before acting. It prioritized your survival over perfect accuracy. It used the context of the dim forest and the shape of the object to instantly project a threat onto reality, because in the brutal mathematics of human evolution, a false alarm is always safer than a missed threat. The brain bends reality to keep us safe. These mental glitches, these illusions of memory and perception, are not signs of a broken, defective mind. They are the exact opposite. They are the signatures of a healthy, beautifully evolved brain doing its absolute best to navigate an overwhelmingly complex, unpredictable world. We could not survive without these shortcuts. If we had to consciously analyze every shadow, every sound, and every routine action, our mental processes would overload and crash. But here is where the story takes a critical turn. The exact same mental machinery that fabricates the memory of the locked door, the exact same system that mistakes a rope for a snake in the twilight, is also responsible for how we perceive the people around us. We carry hidden blind spots about right and wrong, about intelligence and capability, about danger and safety, and about who belongs and who does not. We walk through our lives firmly believing that we are completely objective, rational observers of humanity. We believe that we judge others solely on their merits, their character, and their actions. We are entirely confident that our minds are entirely free of arbitrary biases. Yet, just like the biological blind spot in the eye, our social blind spots are utterly invisible to us until we know exactly how to look for them. We do not feel our brain making leaps of judgment. We do not feel it painting over the gaps in our understanding with assumptions and stereotypes. We only see the seamless, finished picture, and we assume that the picture is the undeniable truth. The journey we are about to take requires a profound kind of courage. It requires us to lay down the heavy, exhausting armor of our own perceived objectivity. It asks us to look in the mirror and acknowledge that the reflection we see and the world we observe is constructed by a mind that is brilliant but fundamentally flawed. We are not here to fix the mind, for its shortcuts are precisely what keep us alive. We are here to understand it. We are here to bring the invisible into the light. We are about to step directly into the blind spot. Chapter 2. The Shades of Truth. We tell ourselves. Think back to a recent conversation you had with an acquaintance, perhaps someone you ran into at the grocery store or a colleague you passed in the hallway. They asked you the most common question in the modern world. How are you? You lightly smiled, adjusted your posture slightly, and replied, I'm doing great, how about you? In that fleeting moment, you may have been exhausted from a sleepless night, stressed about an impending financial deadline, or carrying the heavy weight of a personal argument from the evening before. Yet without a second thought, you delivered a perfectly polished, entirely fictional version of your reality. You did not do this because you are a malicious liar. You did it because human society is built upon a delicate architecture of small, protective untruths. We are all masters of this subtle art. From a very young age, we are taught to manage the impressions we leave on others. We learn to soften our words to protect a friend's feelings. We learn to project confidence in a job interview even when our hands are trembling. We curate the stories we tell about our weekends, quietly editing out the mundane or embarrassing moments to present a version of ourselves that is interesting, capable, and well-adjusted. We are constantly adjusting our masks, ensuring that the face we show to the world aligns with what the world expects and rewards. This conscious curation of our image is a survival mechanism. We are profoundly social creatures, and our safety and success depend entirely on our standing within the group. We want to be seen as fair, honest, and good. We want to be respected, and so we carefully filter our thoughts before they reach our tongues. We feel a flash of petty jealousy, but we speak words of warm congratulation. We feel a surge of immediate, irrational dislike for a stranger, but we extend a hand and offer a polite greeting. We know that if we broadcasted every raw, unfiltered thought that passed through our minds, we would quickly find ourselves isolated and alone. But there is a profound difference between the lies we tell others to keep the peace and the deeply entrenched lies we tell ourselves to maintain our own peace of mind. The conscious filtering we do in public is easy to understand. We know we are doing it. We feel the gap between what we are thinking and what we are saying. But what happens when the audience we are trying to deceive is not the person standing across from us, but the person staring back at us in the mirror? What happens when the mask we wear becomes so familiar that we mistake it for our own skin? We all carry an internal narrative about who we are. For the vast majority of us, that narrative is anchored by a single, unshakable pillar. We believe that we are fundamentally good people. We believe that we are fair-minded, that we treat others as equals, and that our judgments are based on merit and character rather than arbitrary traits. We cling to this identity with immense desperation because to believe otherwise would be psychologically devastating. To protect this self-image, our brains engage in a remarkable and terrifying feat of self-deception. We begin to hide our own truths from our conscious awareness. Imagine a deeply dedicated manager working at a mid-sized company. Let us say this person has spent years building a team. They pride themselves on being a visionary leader, someone who champions diversity and fiercely believes in the absolute equality of all people. If you sat down with this manager over a cup of coffee and asked them about their values, they would speak passionately and eloquently about fairness. They would tell you with absolute unwavering sincerity that they do not see background, age, or superficial traits when they evaluate talent. They only see potential and hard work. Now, watch this manager in action. Late at night, sitting at their desk illuminated only by the glow of a computer screen, they are sorting through hundreds of applications for a crucial new role. They are exhausted, their cognitive resources are depleted, and they need to make fast decisions. They scan the resumes. A certain name feels slightly unfamiliar, subtly difficult to pronounce. The brain hesitates for a fraction of a second, and the resume is placed in the maybe pile. Another resume lists a hobby or an alma mater that instantly sparks a warm, unconscious feeling of familiarity and comfort. That resume goes to the top of the stack. When the interview process concludes, the manager hires someone who, completely by coincidence, looks, sounds, and thinks very much like the rest of the existing team. If you were to point out this pattern to the manager, if you were to suggest that their hiring choices over the last decade overwhelmingly favored one specific demographic, they would be genuinely, deeply offended. They would feel attacked. They would point to the specific, logical reasons why they hired each individual. This person had better communication skills. That person seemed like a better culture fit. This other person showed more immediate enthusiasm. The manager is not lying to you, and they are not lying to themselves in any conscious way. Their conscious mind genuinely believes the reasons it has provided, but their conscious mind is merely acting as a defense attorney, furiously generating logical explanations to justify decisions that were actually made by the silent, hidden, deeply biased architecture of the unconscious. This is the most dangerous shade of truth we tell ourselves. It is the sincere, heartfelt belief in our own absolute objectivity. When a politician gets caught in a scandal and claims they did nothing wrong, or when a scam artist looks their victim in the eye and makes a false promise, we are witnessing deliberate deception. That kind of lying is simple. It is a transaction. But the self-deception of the good person is entirely different. It is a structural divide within the human mind. It is a wall between our explicit values, the things we proudly claim to believe, and our implicit instincts, the deeply programmed associations that actually govern our behavior in the split seconds of daily life. Why does the brain do this? Why does it hide our own prejudices and biases from us? Because the brain is designed to avoid cognitive dissonance, that agonizing mental pain that occurs when our actions completely contradict our beliefs. If the dedicated manager were forced to consciously experience every tiny, biased judgment they made throughout the day, the pain of recognizing their own hypocrisy would be unbearable. The brain protects the ego by keeping the conscious mind comfortably in the dark. It allows us to glide through life wrapped in the warm, comforting illusion of our own righteousness. But this comfort comes at a staggering cost. As long as we believe that our conscious intentions are the only things driving our behavior, we remain completely blind to the silent forces that are actually steering the ship. We cannot fix a problem we refuse to acknowledge exists. We cannot correct a bias if we have already declared ourselves immune to it. The first step toward true self-awareness is stepping away from the need to be perfectly good and embracing the reality of being perfectly human. It requires us to look at the stories we tell ourselves about our own fairness and recognize them for what they are: well-intentioned, deeply comforting shades of truth. We must learn to distinguish between the values we hold in our hearts and the automatic reflexes that fire in our brains. The fact that your brain makes an unfair assumption or relies on a stereotype does not mean your conscious values are a lie. It simply means your biology is functioning exactly as it was programmed to function by a complex, flawed world. To peel back the layers of self-deception, we must stop asking ourselves, "Am I a good person?" and begin asking a much more difficult, much more powerful question: what is my mind doing right now that I cannot see? The answer to that question lies just beneath the surface of our awareness, in a vast, silent territory that dictates the course of our lives. It is time to venture into the architecture of the unconscious. Chapter 3. Unveiling the Unconscious. Think about the keyboard you use every single day, whether it is on your phone or your computer. If you have been typing for years, your fingers know exactly where every letter lives. You never have to consciously instruct your left index finger to reach for the letter F or your right thumb to hit the space bar. The mere thought of a word instantly and effortlessly translates into physical movement. Your brain and your hands are in perfect, unconscious alignment. Now, imagine if someone broke into your home in the middle of the night and simply swapped the positions of two common letters on your keyboard. The next morning, you sit down with your coffee, fully awake, fully conscious of your intentions, and try to write a simple, everyday message. What happens? You stumble. Your fingers reach for the familiar spot and strike the wrong key. You stop. You freeze for a fraction of a second. You have to consciously look down, find the new location of the letter, and forcefully override years of deeply ingrained muscle memory to press it. That fraction of a second, that microscopic moment of hesitation, that tiny stutter of the fingers, is not just a symptom of a changed keyboard. It is the most powerful, revealing window into the hidden mechanics of the human mind ever discovered. For centuries, philosophers and scientists struggled with a monumental problem. How do you measure the unconscious? How do you map a territory that the mind itself cannot see and actively hides from its own awareness? You cannot simply ask people what their biases are because, as we have already seen, our conscious minds act as defense attorneys, spinning tales of our own perfect fairness. If we ask a person what they believe, they will tell us what they value. But their values are not always their reality. The secret to unveiling the unconscious does not lie in what we say. It lies in the speed of our reactions. It lies in the friction of our associations. Our minds are built upon a vast, invisible web of connections. From the very moment we are born, our brains act as relentless, indiscriminate sponges, absorbing the patterns of the world around us. This is how we learn to survive. If a child touches a hot stove, the brain instantly wires the concept of heat to the concept of pain. The next time they see a glowing burner, they do not need to consciously deliberate the physics of heat transfer. The association fires automatically, and they pull their hand away. This filing system is flawlessly efficient, but it does not stop at physical dangers. It absorbs social patterns just as aggressively. If we constantly, repetitively see certain types of people cast as the heroes in our movies, the authorities in our news broadcasts, and the leaders in our history books, the brain wires those physical traits directly to the concepts of good, safe, and competent. Conversely, if we are bombarded with images that link other types of people to danger, poverty, or failure, the brain dutifully wires those connections too. The brain does not stop to ask if these cultural patterns are fair, accurate, or morally right. It simply records the data. It builds the associations. Over decades, these links become the mental equivalent of your computer keyboard. They become the default settings of your worldview. So, how do we reveal these hidden settings? By measuring the stutter. Imagine a deeply compassionate person who has devoted their entire life to helping the marginalized. This person believes with every fiber of their being in the absolute, unquestionable equality of all human beings. Now, imagine we sit this person down at a computer and ask them to play a high-speed game of word sorting. We tell them to hit a key on the left when they see a word related to joy or peace, and a key on the right when they see a word related to agony or war. They perform this task with lightning speed. The connections are natural. Then we introduce images of people. We ask them to pair the concepts of joy and peace with faces of people who look like the cultural default, the people society has traditionally placed on a pedestal. The fingers fly across the keys. The filing system aligns perfectly with the cultural narrative. There is zero friction, but then we switch the rules. We ask this beautiful, compassionate person to pair those same positive words with the faces of people from marginalized groups, people whom society has subtly and overtly pushed to the fringes. Suddenly, something profound and deeply uncomfortable happens. The person's conscious mind is fully on board. They want to make the connection. They believe in the connection, but their fingers hesitate. Just for a few milliseconds. Just a tiny, involuntary stutter. In that microscopic delay, a heartbreaking truth is revealed. The brain is pausing because it is encountering a contradiction. The conscious desire for equality is colliding violently with a deeply ingrained, unconscious cultural stereotype. The mind has to spend a fraction of a second overriding the automatic association before it can hit the correct key. When people first experience this, when they feel their own hands betraying their stated values, when they witness their own hidden biases laid bare in the form of a mathematical reaction time, the emotional response is often profound. It is a mixture of shock, denial, and a deep, aching sense of guilt. It feels like a moral failure. It feels as though a dark, ugly secret has been dragged out of the basement of their soul. But this is the most crucial realization of our journey. Discovering an implicit bias is not a diagnosis of evil. It is a diagnosis of being alive in a deeply imperfect world. You did not choose the environment you were born into. You did not write the scripts of the television shows you watched as a child, nor did you direct the nightly news, nor did you draft the history books. You are carrying luggage that you did not pack. The automatic associations firing in your brain are not a reflection of your moral character. They are a reflection of the culture that raised you. However, while we are not responsible for the unconscious programming we inherited, we are absolutely responsible for what we do once we become aware of it. We can no longer hide behind the illusion of pure objectivity. We can no longer trust our initial gut reactions to be free of prejudice. The stutter has shown us the truth. To break free from the invisible puppet strings of our own minds, we must step out of denial. We must stop feeling guilty for having a brain that works exactly the way human brains were designed to work, and start doing the hard, conscious work of overriding the system. The blind spot has been illuminated. Now we must examine what happens when these hidden associations leak out into the real world, dictating the choices we make and the lives we impact. Chapter 4. The divide between intention and instinct. Have you ever sat on a doctor's examination table, legs dangling over the edge, waiting for the familiar tap of a rubber reflex hammer just below your kneecap? You can see the hammer coming. You know exactly what is about to happen. You can even silently command your leg to stay perfectly still. You can focus all of your conscious willpower on not moving a single muscle. But the moment the rubber strikes the tendon, your leg kicks outward anyway. Your conscious intention was entirely overridden by a biological reflex. We easily accept this disconnect when it comes to our physical bodies. We understand that we have an automatic nervous system that operates below the level of our conscious control, designed to protect us from harm before we even have time to think. But what is infinitely harder to accept is that we possess an identical system for our thoughts, our judgments, and our social behaviors. There is a profound, often painful divide between the person we intend to be and the instincts that fire within us. It is the chasm between our explicit values, the deeply held beliefs we proudly declare to the world, and our implicit reactions, the involuntary mental reflexes shaped by a lifetime of cultural conditioning. To understand the weight of this divide, imagine a parent walking home with their young child on a cool, crisp autumn evening. The streetlights are just beginning to flicker on, casting long shadows on the pavement. The parent loves this child fiercely and has dedicated immense energy to raising them with strong, modern values. They are currently having a beautiful conversation about kindness, about how every human being is equal, and about how we must never judge a book by its cover. The parent feels a deep sense of pride in passing down these noble truths. Suddenly, a figure rounds the corner and begins walking toward them on the same side of the street. This stranger belongs to a group of people that society, through decades of subtle media messaging, news headlines, and whispered stereotypes, has continuously associated with danger or unpredictability. The parent's conscious mind, the architect of their values, looks at the stranger and registers a fellow human being taking an evening stroll. The conscious mind says, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this person. But the unconscious mind, the ancient, survival-driven engine, does not consult the parent's moral philosophy. It consults the vast, invisible database of cultural associations it has absorbed since childhood. It recognizes a pattern that society has labeled a threat. Before the parent can form a single conscious thought, before logic can intervene, the unconscious mind triggers a microscopic alarm. And in a fraction of a second, entirely without meaning to, the parent tightens their grip on their child's hand. It is a tiny movement, a subtle clenching of the fingers. But the child feels it. And in that silent tightening, a lesson is transferred that entirely contradicts the beautiful speech about equality they were just having. When the stranger passes harmlessly by with a polite nod, the parent realizes what they have just done. A hot wave of shame and guilt washes over them. How could they do that? They do not believe this stranger is dangerous. They despise prejudice. They have dedicated their life to fairness. Yet their physical body betrayed their deepest convictions. They feel like a hypocrite. They feel like a fraud. This scenario plays out in millions of invisible ways every single day. It happens when a teacher feels a sudden, unexplainable surge of impatience with one student while offering endless grace to another. It happens when a doctor unconsciously dismisses the pain of a patient who does not look like them. It happens when we cross the street, lock our doors, or subtly shift our tone of voice, driven by instincts we did not ask for and do not consciously endorse. When we first discover this divide within ourselves, our natural reaction is intense defensiveness. We want to distance ourselves from our own instincts. We declare loudly and repeatedly that we are inclusive, that we are open-minded, that there is nothing wrong with anyone. We try to use our conscious intentions as a shield against our unconscious reflexes. But intention is not enough. Believing that good intentions automatically erase deeply programmed biases is like believing that reading a book about aviation automatically makes you a pilot. You might understand the theory of flight perfectly, but when you are thrown into the cockpit and the alarms start blaring, your hands will not know what to do. Our cultural programming is the environment we have been flying in since birth. We cannot simply wish away the turbulence. The guilt we feel when our instincts betray our values is actually a sign of our humanity. It means our moral compass is functioning. But we cannot allow that guilt to paralyze us. Guilt is a static emotion. It keeps us trapped in a cycle of shame and denial. We must transition from guilt to profound responsibility. You are not a bad person because your brain executed a culturally programmed reflex. You are simply a human being possessing a human brain. The true measure of your character is not found in the initial automatic reflex because you do not control that reflex. The true measure of your character is found in the critical seconds immediately following the instinct. Do you surrender to the tightening of the grip, allowing the invisible fear to dictate your actions and poison the next generation? Or do you catch yourself in the gap? Do you take a breath, recognize the mental illusion for what it is, consciously relax your hand and choose to align your behavior with your true values? Bridging the divide between intention and instinct requires a relentless, exhausting, but utterly beautiful form of self-awareness. It demands that we stop pretending we are perfect, objective machines and accept that we are constantly navigating a landscape of invisible mental tripwires. It requires us to become active, vigilant editors of our own minds, catching the automatic thoughts before they become actions. But to edit these thoughts, we must first understand how they are built. We must look at how the brain takes the infinite complexity of the human race and forcefully, violently shoves it into neat, manageable little boxes. We must examine the architecture of how we categorize the world. Chapter 5. How the brain organizes the world. To truly understand the sheer, terrifying processing power of your own mind, I want you to imagine what it would be like to wake up tomorrow morning with a very specific, highly unusual form of amnesia. In this scenario, you have not forgotten your name, you have not lost your intelligence, and you remember all of your loved ones perfectly. But you have lost one crucial cognitive ability. You have entirely lost the capacity to group similar things together. You can no longer categorize the world. Imagine walking into your kitchen to make breakfast. You look at the refrigerator. Because you cannot categorize it as an appliance or a storage container, you must stand there and analyze its tall, metallic structure, the handle on the front, and the humming sound it makes, attempting to deduce its purpose from scratch. You finally figure it out and retrieve an egg. But when you turn to the counter, you see a pan. Again, you are stumped. You have to relearn what a pan is, what a stove is, what fire does to metal, and what heat does to food. If your mind actually worked this way, you would never make it out of the kitchen. You would be utterly paralyzed, crushed under the infinite, overwhelming complexity of a world where every single object, every single moment, and every single interaction was treated as a completely unique, unprecedented event. You survive the chaos of reality because your brain is the most magnificent sorting machine in the known universe. From the moment you open your eyes in the morning, your mind is furiously organizing the incoming avalanche of sensory data. It instantly identifies patterns, lumps similar items together, and applies a universal label to them. You do not need to analyze a four-legged wooden structure with a backrest. Your brain instantly drops it into the file labeled chair, and you know you can sit on it. You do not need to inspect every piece of fruit at the market. Your brain recognizes the category of apple, and you instantly know how it will taste, how it will crunch, and that it is safe to eat. This biological superpower is called categorization. It is efficient, it is relentless, and it is the absolute foundation of human survival. It allows us to navigate a staggeringly complex environment on autopilot, freeing up our conscious energy to solve higher-level problems, dream, create, and build. But this incredible evolutionary gift comes with a dark, heavy shadow. The brain's absolute obsession with sorting the world into neat, manageable boxes does not stop at furniture, fruit, or dangerous animals. It applies the exact same ruthless efficiency to the most complex, unpredictable, and deeply nuanced entities on the face of the earth, other human beings. Picture a bustling coffee shop in the heart of a major city on a Tuesday morning. You are sitting in the corner, nursing a warm drink, simply watching the door. The bell chimes, and a person walks in. They are wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored suit. Their posture is rigid and upright, and they are glancing impatiently at a heavy, expensive-looking watch. In less time than it takes you to blink, your brain has opened a file and dropped this entire human being inside it. It assigns them a category: wealthy, authoritative, driven, perhaps a bit ruthless, likely successful. A few minutes later, the bell chimes again. Another person walks in. They are wearing faded, paint-splattered overalls. Their hair is messy, and their shoulders are slumped in exhaustion. Instantly, the brain opens a different file. It categorizes this person: blue-collar, struggling, perhaps uneducated, working a grueling manual labor job. You have not spoken a single word to either of these people. You do not know their names, their histories, their tragedies, or their triumphs. Yet your mind has already written the entire story of their lives. What if the person in the tailored suit is actually drowning in terrible debt, wearing a rented outfit on their way to a desperate final chance job interview, completely terrified of losing their home? What if the person in the paint-splattered overalls is a world-renowned master sculptor who just spent 3 sleepless, passionate days completing a piece of art that will sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars? The brain does not care about these hidden depths. The brain does not care about nuance, poetry, or the beautiful, messy contradictions of the human soul. It only cares about speed. It takes the infinite, multi-dimensional reality of a person and violently flattens them into a 2-dimensional caricature based on a handful of visual markers: age, clothing, gender, skin color, and physical stature. When we apply the tool of categorization to objects, we call it recognizing patterns. When we apply that exact same cognitive tool to people, we call it stereotyping. We have been taught to think of stereotypes as the deliberate, malicious weapons of bad people. We believe that only the cruel and the ignorant rely on them. But this is a comforting illusion. Stereotyping is not merely a defect of character. It is a fundamental design flaw in human biology. Your brain is generating stereotypes right now, every single day, whether you want it to or not. It is trying to save you time. It is trying to predict who is safe and who is dangerous, who belongs in your group and who does not, based on the deeply flawed cultural programming it has absorbed over your lifetime. The danger of these mental boxes is not just that they are often wildly inaccurate. The true danger is that once the brain places a person into a category, it stops looking at them. The mind considers the work finished. It slaps a label on the jar and never bothers to unscrew the lid to examine the actual contents. When you look at a stranger through the lens of a category, you are no longer seeing a human being. You are seeing a symbol. You are seeing a representative of a concept. You interact with the label, not the life. You assume you know their capabilities, their intelligence, their work ethic, and their morality, all based on the shape of the box your brain forced them into. We cannot perform a surgical strike to remove the brain's categorization engine. If we did, we would return to the paralysis of amnesia, unable to navigate a simple kitchen. The goal is not to stop the mind from generating these automatic files, because we simply cannot. The goal is to develop the conscious discipline to refuse to trust the filing system. We must become relentlessly suspicious of our own first impressions. We must train ourselves to feel the satisfying click of the brain putting someone into a box, and consciously, deliberately pry that box back open. We must remind ourselves, over and over again, that the human being standing in front of us is a vast, uncharted universe, entirely unique in the history of the world, and that no biological shortcut will ever be capable of capturing their truth. Because when we allow these unconscious categories to govern our actions, the damage we do is not theoretical. It leaks out into our schools, our hospitals, our courtrooms, and our workplaces. It creates a world where the shape of the box determines the trajectory of a life. And as we will soon see, the invisible costs of these assumptions are staggering. Chapter 6. The invisible costs of our assumptions. Imagine trying to run a marathon while wearing a heavy, lead-lined vest. The course itself is already grueling, requiring immense stamina, focus, and years of relentless training. But while the other runners are wearing lightweight gear, moving freely and efficiently, you are forced to carry an extra 40 pounds on your shoulders. You might still finish the race. You might even perform exceptionally well. But the sheer amount of extra energy you had to burn just to keep up, the silent toll it took on your muscles and your lungs, is a burden only you can feel. This physical metaphor precisely captures the deeply hidden psychological cost of the stereotypes we project onto one another. We often think of our private assumptions as harmless. We tell ourselves that as long as we do not speak our biases out loud, as long as we remain polite and professional, no one is getting hurt. But human beings are incredibly sensitive social barometers. We do not just hear the words people say to us, we feel the atmospheric pressure of their expectations. And when you force a person to operate inside a restrictive mental box, you are strapping a lead weight to their mind. To understand how this invisible mechanism works, picture a deeply talented, intensely prepared individual standing just outside the doors of a massive, intimidating boardroom. They are about to deliver the most important presentation of their career to a panel of high-level executives. They know the material flawlessly. They have practiced in front of the mirror for weeks. They possess all the intelligence, creativity, and drive necessary to command the room and secure the contract. But there is a catch. This individual knows, through years of subtle social conditioning and past experiences, that people with their specific background or their age or their physical appearance are generally viewed by society as less competent in this particular arena. They know the stereotype exists. They can feel it hanging in the air the moment they walk through the heavy wooden doors and look into the eyes of the executives. In a fair and neutral world, this presenter would be able to dedicate 100% of their cognitive energy to delivering their brilliant ideas. But because the stereotype is in the room, their brain is instantly split in half. A massive portion of their mental processing power is suddenly hijacked by the desperate need to disprove the assumption. As they begin to speak, an agonizing internal monologue starts running parallel to their presentation. Am I talking too fast? If I stumble on this word, will they think I am uneducated? If I show too much passion, will they label me as overly emotional? I must stand perfectly straight. I must sound absolutely flawless, because if I make one tiny mistake, I am not just failing for myself, I am confirming everything they already suspect about people like me. This internal policing requires an enormous amount of neurological energy. The brain is attempting to juggle the complex task of public speaking while simultaneously managing a high-stakes, real-time threat to its social survival. Under this crushing cognitive load, the presenter's working memory begins to falter. They forget a key statistic. They lose the rhythm of their argument. They hesitate, their confidence visibly cracking. When the presentation ends, the executives politely decline the proposal. The executives feel totally justified. They observed a nervous, slightly disorganized presenter, completely unaware that their own silent collective expectations created the very failure they just witnessed. The stereotype did not just predict the outcome, it aggressively manufactured it. This is the most devastating cost of our hidden biases. They create self-fulfilling prophecies. When we expect someone to be hostile, our tone becomes defensive, which in turn causes them to react with the exact hostility we predicted. When we unconsciously expect a student or a colleague to struggle, we offer them less patience, less warmth, and less grace, subtly starving them of the environment they need to thrive. We build invisible walls around people, and then we calmly observe that they are trapped, believing it must be their own fault. The tragedy of this dynamic is not just measured in failed presentations or awkward interactions. It is measured in the quiet, heartbreaking loss of human potential over the course of a lifetime. Think of the brilliant minds that slowly, painfully step away from challenging fields, from science, from leadership, from the arts, not because they lacked the talent, but because the daily exhausting friction of simply proving they belonged there drained the joy and the life out of their passion. They grew tired of carrying the lead vest. We lose unimaginable beauty, innovation, and progress as a society because we refuse to examine the atmospheric pressure we are putting on one another. We leave profound genius on the table simply because it did not arrive in the package our biological sorting machine expected. Recognizing this invisible cost is a heavy burden to bear. It means accepting that our private thoughts are not harmless. It means understanding that our silent judgments leak into our body language, our eye contact, and the micro-expressions on our faces, sending powerful restrictive signals to the people around us. But there is immense hope in this realization as well. If our negative assumptions possess the power to diminish human potential, then our conscious, deliberate refusal to assume possesses the exact same power to elevate it. Imagine the profound relief, the sudden surge of energy that a person feels when they walk into a room and realize they are not being judged as a symbol or a category. Imagine what people are capable of when they are allowed to use 100% of their cognitive energy to simply be excellent, rather than using half of it to prove they have the right to exist. To create that kind of environment, to lift that weight off the shoulders of the world, we must look at how we define our tribes. We must examine the ancient, deep-seated instincts that divide the human race into the safe, comfortable circle of the familiar and the vast, uncertain ocean of everyone else. We must explore the anatomy of us and them. Chapter 7. The Anatomy of Us and Them. Imagine two brothers growing up under the same roof, sharing a bedroom that feels entirely too small for their competing personalities. Every evening, that room transforms into an intense, emotionally charged battlefield. They sit side by side, staring at a screen, locked in a fierce, relentless video game rivalry. They know exactly how to exploit each other's weaknesses. They know exactly what words will sting the most when one of them loses. In the confined universe of that bedroom, the dividing line is absolute. It is a world of me versus you. But watch what happens when those same two brothers walk out the front door and head down to the local park. Suppose a group of unfamiliar older kids approaches and one of them harshly insults the younger brother. In a fraction of a second, the bitter rivalry that consumed them just moments before completely evaporates. The boundary line instantly redrawn. The older brother steps forward, shielding his sibling. The me versus you has vanished, instantly replaced by an unbreakable, fiercely protective us against a foreign them. This beautiful, ordinary transformation perfectly illustrates one of the most profound and deeply ingrained mechanisms of the human mind. The boundary of our tribe is not a permanent wall built of stone. It is a fluid, moving spotlight, and where that spotlight shines dictates almost everything about how we distribute our empathy, our trust, and our resources. To understand the architecture of this spotlight, we must travel back to the earliest days of human existence. In the unforgiving landscape of our ancient ancestors, isolation was an absolute death sentence. A human being standing alone against predators, starvation, and the elements stood no chance. Survival required cooperation. It required the sharing of food, the division of labor, and the mutual protection of the group. But trust is an expensive biological currency. You cannot share your limited winter food supply with just anyone, because if they do not reciprocate when you are starving, your genetic line ends. The brain had to develop a fast, highly reliable system for answering the most critical question in the universe: are you one of mine? When the brain identifies someone as belonging to the in-group, when it registers the warm, comforting signature of us, it unlocks a magnificent suite of psychological rewards. We naturally extend the benefit of the doubt to our own people. We forgive their mistakes more easily, attributing their failures to bad luck rather than bad character. We feel their pain more acutely, and we celebrate their victories as if they were our own. This deep, tribal loyalty is the very glue that holds families, communities, and nations together. It is the source of our greatest acts of heroism and self-sacrifice. However, the shadow cast by this brilliant spotlight is the root cause of the most persistent, quiet inequities in our modern world. When we think of the word discrimination, we typically conjure images of overt hostility. We picture active hatred, visible anger, and deliberate attempts to block or harm a specific group of people. We look into our own hearts, and finding no active hatred for strangers, we confidently declare that we are free of prejudice. But the modern anatomy of inequality does not usually look like a slammed door. Most of the time, it looks like a quietly opened window. Consider a successful local shop owner. After years of relentless work, early mornings, and building a business from the ground up, they finally have the budget to hire a paid apprentice, a position that could easily launch a young person's entire career. The owner announces the opening and resumes pour in from across the city. The owner wants to be fair, but human nature whispers in their ear. Among the applicants is a young person who grew up in the exact same neighborhood as the owner. They perhaps went to the same local school, or their family attends the same community gatherings. The shop owner looks at this applicant and feels a sudden, warm rush of familiarity. They see a reflection of their own younger self. They feel an immediate, intuitive sense of trust. When the shop owner ultimately gives the apprenticeship to the kid from the neighborhood, they do not do it because they hate the other applicants. They do not harbor any malice toward the people from across town. They simply leaned into the comfortable gravity of their own tribe. They utilized their power to give a vital boost to a member of their in-group. This is how the vast majority of social advantage is distributed in the world today. It is not driven by the active punishment of them, but by the relentless, invisible hoarding of opportunity for us. When a manager unconsciously mentors the junior employee who shares their hobbies, when a doctor takes an extra 5 minutes to listen to a patient who speaks with the same regional accent, or when an investor funds the entrepreneur who reminds them of a younger sibling, no explicit malice is occurring. Yet, the final result is identical to overt discrimination. The people outside the spotlight are starved of the crucial connections, the extra grace, and the vital opportunities required to thrive. They are left out in the cold, not because they were pushed, but simply because they were not pulled inside. The terrifying truth about our tribal instinct is just how little it takes to trigger it. We do not need a shared history, a shared religion, or a shared bloodline to draw the boundary. Decades of psychological research have proven that if you take a group of completely identical strangers and randomly assign them to wear either a blue shirt or a red shirt, within hours, the blue shirts will begin to believe that the red shirts are less intelligent, less trustworthy, and less deserving of rewards. We will build a tribe out of absolutely anything. But within this terrifying fragility lies our greatest weapon for change. If the boundary of us is entirely arbitrary, if it can be drawn and redrawn as easily as two brothers shifting from rivals to allies in a park, then it is entirely within our power to manually expand the circle. We are not trapped by the ancient survival mechanisms of the brain. We have the conscious capacity to look at the stranger standing outside the spotlight, recognize the biological illusion that makes them feel distant or different, and deliberately invite them into the warmth. We can choose to extend the unearned trust, the benefit of the doubt, and the quiet helping hand to those who do not look like us, sound like us, or share our immediate history. This requires a profound act of defiance against our own biology. It requires us to acknowledge that our feelings of familiarity are not a flawless compass for fairness, To create a truly equitable world, we must stop simply relying on our instincts and start actively outsmarting the very machinery of our own minds. Chapter 8. Outsmarting Our Own Minds. Imagine you are the captain of a massive, ocean-faring vessel navigating a treacherous stretch of sea. Your ship is powerful, built to withstand incredible storms, but it has a subtle, deeply embedded mechanical flaw. The rudder constantly, almost imperceptibly, pulls to the left. If you stand on the bridge, close your eyes, and simply wish with all of your heart that the ship will sail in a perfectly straight line, you will eventually crash into the rocks. Wishing does not change the physical mechanics of the vessel. Good intentions do not alter the current. To keep the ship on course, you have to physically grip the wooden wheel and apply constant, deliberate, exhausting counterpressure to the right. This is the exact predicament we find ourselves in as human beings trying to navigate a complex social world. We have spent this journey uncovering the quiet, invisible machinery of our own minds. We have looked at the mental blind spots, the cultural programming we absorbed without our consent, and the automatic filing system that sorts human beings into restrictive little boxes. It is a terrifying realization, discovering that your own brain is constantly generating judgments that violate your deepest moral values. The natural response to this realization is a sudden, fierce surge of willpower. We declare that we will simply try harder. We promise ourselves that we will be more objective, more open-minded, and perfectly fair from this day forward. But here is the hard, uncompromising truth. Willpower is not a strategy. Believing that you can permanently defeat a deeply wired biological instinct simply by wanting to be a good person is the ultimate willpower trap. Your conscious mind, the part of you that holds your values and makes those noble promises, is a relatively slow, energy-hungry processor. It gets tired, it gets distracted, it gets overwhelmed by stress, hunger, and lack of sleep. But your unconscious mind, the ancient survival engine generating those immediate biases, never sleeps. It never gets tired. It fires in milliseconds, 24 hours a day. If you pit your conscious willpower against your unconscious reflexes in a sheer test of endurance, the unconscious will win every single time. We cannot rewire the ancient architecture of the brain. We cannot magically erase decades of cultural conditioning overnight, but we do not have to, because while we may not be able to break the machine, we possess the profound human capacity to outsmart it. To defeat our hidden biases, we have to stop relying on our good intentions and start building structural guardrails. We must design environments and processes that protect us from ourselves. Picture a deeply dedicated university professor who has spent 20 years in the classroom. This educator genuinely loves their students and fiercely believes in grading based purely on academic merit. It is the end of the semester, and a massive stack of final term papers sits heavily on their desk under the warm glow of a reading lamp. This professor knows the students intimately. They know who sits in the front row, participating eagerly, and who sits in the back, staring out the window. They know that when they see the name of their favorite, most enthusiastic student at the top of a page, their brain will immediately, unconsciously prepare to read a brilliant essay. Because they expect brilliance, they will read the text with immense generosity, quietly glossing over clumsy sentences or weak arguments. Conversely, when they see the name of a student who has been difficult or disengaged, the brain expects failure. The professor will read that essay with a hypercritical eye, magnifying every minor grammatical error into a major flaw. How does this deeply caring educator solve this problem? They do not sit at the desk, close their eyes, and try to force themselves to be perfectly objective. They know their brain will pull to the left. Instead, they institute a simple, unbending mechanical rule. Every student must submit their final paper with a randomly assigned identification number, completely omitting their name. By making this one structural change, the professor completely unplugs the brain's stereotype engine. There is no name to trigger the bias. There is no face to attach to the expectation. The professor is forced to interact purely with the words on the page. They have successfully blinded themselves to the very information that triggers their unfair instincts. This concept of blinding is one of the most powerful tools we have for outsmarting our own minds, and it can be applied to countless areas of our lives. When we are evaluating a proposal, hiring a new team member, or judging a competition, we must aggressively ask ourselves, what information am I looking at right now that I do not actually need? If a piece of data, a name, a photograph, a hometown, is not directly relevant to the core decision. It is merely acting as fuel for your unconscious biases. Remove the fuel and the engine stops running. But blinding only works when we are evaluating distant information, like a resume or an essay. How do we outsmart the machine in the messy face-to-face reality of our daily lives, where we cannot simply hide a person's identity behind an identification number? In those moments, we must become the active curators of our own mental environment. Remember that your unconscious mind is a sponge, constantly absorbing the images, narratives, and associations of the culture around you. If society is constantly feeding your brain stereotypical imagery, you must forcefully inject counter-stereotypical data into the system. Look at the physical and digital spaces you inhabit. Look at the books resting on your shelves, the voices you subscribe to on your phone, the leaders you study, and the art you consume. Are they simply reflecting the same comfortable, familiar cultural defaults you have always known? If so, your brain is just running the same old software on an endless loop. You must deliberately seek out the brilliant, the heroic, and the profound in the places your brain least expects to find them. You must flood your mind with vivid, undeniable examples of people who completely shatter the restrictive boxes society has built. When your brain repeatedly encounters undeniable excellence that contradicts its lazy assumptions, the mental tripwires begin to slowly rewire themselves. The automatic stutter we explored earlier begins to smooth out. Finally, outsmarting the mind requires us to build internal speed bumps. Because bias thrives on speed and efficiency, the greatest weapon you have against it is a deliberate pause. When you feel a sudden, unexplainable surge of distrust toward a stranger, or when you find yourself instantly dismissing an idea before it has even been fully articulated, you must learn to recognize that immediate rush of certainty as a flashing warning light. Do not trust the certainty. Force yourself to stop. Take a single deep breath and ask yourself a structural question. If this exact same action had been performed by someone who looked like me, or someone I already deeply loved, how would I interpret it? By forcing your brain to run that hypothetical scenario, you interrupt the automatic reflex. You drag the unconscious impulse up into the light of your conscious awareness, where you can inspect it, challenge it, and ultimately choose a better path. The human mind is an astonishing piece of machinery. It has allowed us to build civilizations, map the stars, and write poetry that can break a heart in a single sentence. But it is your machine. You are its architect, and you are its master. It is time to stop letting the autopilot dictate the course of your life. When millions of individuals begin to grab the wheel and adjust the course, a profound shift begins to occur. But what happens when we look backwards? What happens when these invisible biases have been operating unchecked, not just in a single mind, but across millions of minds for centuries? We must now pull the lens back and look at the deep historical roots of the world we have inherited. Chapter 9. The Evolution of Bias. Imagine that you have just inherited an incredibly old, sprawling, magnificent house. It has been passed down through countless generations. When you finally walk through the front door, you marvel at the thick wooden beams and the grand fireplaces. You love this house, and you are deeply proud to call it your home. But as you begin to live in it day after day, you notice a few undeniable realities. The floorboards in the hallway slope noticeably to the left. Some of the heavy oak doors refuse to close perfectly within their frames. In certain rooms, the air always feels a bit colder, no matter how high you turn up the heat. If you are a responsible homeowner, you do not look at the sloping floors and declare that they do not exist simply because you did not build them. You do not take the cold drafts as a personal insult to your character. You understand a fundamental truth. You are not the architect of this house. You did not lay the foundation, you did not frame the walls, and you did not pour the concrete. You are entirely innocent of the construction, yet you are the current tenant. The house is yours now, and the sloping floors dictate how you walk down the hallway every single day. For the entirety of our journey so far, we have been looking deeply into the internal architecture of the human mind. We have explored the biological blind spots, the instant sorting mechanisms, and the ancient survival instincts that cause our brains to make unfair assumptions. We have treated bias as a function of individual psychology, but the brain does not exist in a vacuum. It is a sponge, and the water it absorbs is history. To truly understand why our minds reflexively push some people away and pull others close, we have to zoom out. We must shift our gaze from the biology of the brain to the history of the world. We must look at the house we inherited. Imagine a city founded hundreds of years ago, built on the banks of a wide, rushing river. In the early, brutal days of this city's history, the founders made a harsh, deliberate set of rules. They declared that one specific group of people, based entirely on an arbitrary physical trait, was allowed to build their homes on the lush, fertile eastern bank, where the soil was rich and the trade routes were accessible. Everyone else was forced to live on the rocky, unforgiving western bank. For generations, the eastern bank thrived. They built beautiful schools, established generational wealth, and passed down networks of power and influence. On the western bank, the people worked just as hard, bled just as much, and loved their children just as fiercely, but every ounce of their energy was spent simply surviving the rocky soil. Now, fast forward 300 years. The world has modernized. The cruel, explicit laws of the founders have been universally condemned and permanently erased from the books. A beautiful, grand bridge has been built across the river, and the city's leaders proudly declare that everyone is entirely free to live, work, and thrive wherever they choose. The modern citizens of the Eastern Bank are good, kind-hearted people. They look across the river and feel genuine goodwill toward their neighbors. They despise the cruel history of their ancestors. But watch what happens in the silent, everyday reality of this modern city. When a business owner on the Eastern Bank needs to hire a new executive, they naturally ask their friends for recommendations. Their friends, who also live on the Eastern Bank, recommend other people from the Eastern Bank. When a bank approves a loan, they look for collateral and generational wealth, things that naturally accumulated on the eastern side of the river. The people on the Eastern Bank are not operating out of hatred. They are not intentionally trying to keep the people on the Western Bank down. In fact, if you accused them of malice, they would be deeply hurt and offended. But the momentum of history is doing the work for them. The laws are gone, but the infrastructure remains. This is the great evolution of bias. It has mutated from a loud, explicit, aggressive force into a quiet, passive, environmental reality. For a very long time, society defined prejudice purely as an active, burning hatred. We pictured the villains of history books, people who proudly and violently declared their superiority over others. Because we defined the problem so narrowly, we created a massive cultural blind spot. We told ourselves that as long as we did not harbor active malice in our hearts, we were completely free of the stain of prejudice. But history does not evaporate just because we stop agreeing with it. The centuries of unequal laws, the deeply skewed distribution of wealth, the way our cities were physically zoned, and the narratives that dominated our media for decades, all of these things created a profound cultural gravity. Your brain, doing what it was brilliantly designed to do, looked around at this historically inherited landscape and simply recorded the data. It saw that certain types of people were disproportionately represented in positions of power, and it quietly wired a connection between their physical appearance and the concept of competence. It saw that other groups of people were disproportionately struggling or marginalized, and it quietly wired a connection between them and the concept of risk. Your brain did not ask if the data was the result of a long, unfair history. It just built the associations. When you discover an implicit bias within yourself, when your hand hesitates in the word-sorting exercise, or when you feel that sudden, unearned flash of distrust toward a stranger, you are not discovering a secret reservoir of hatred. You are discovering the architectural blueprints of the past, still echoing in your nervous system. You are feeling the slope of the floorboards in the inherited house. This realization is profoundly liberating. It shatters the exhausting, paralyzing defensive wall we build around our own egos. When we divorce the concept of implicit bias from the concept of moral evil, we give ourselves permission to finally look at the problem honestly. You do not have to be a monster to harbor a stereotype. You only have to be a human being who grew up in a world that was unevenly built. But with this liberation comes an immense, undeniable responsibility. The defense of innocence only lasts for the moment of discovery. You can honestly say, I did not build this house. But once you know the floorboards are sloping, once you understand that your brain is heavily weighted by the momentum of history, you can no longer claim ignorance when someone trips and falls. We are living in the critical gap between the world that was and the world that could be. The active, burning hatreds of the past were fought and largely dismantled by the courage of previous generations. The battle of our current generation is entirely different. Our battle is against the quiet, comfortable, invisible momentum of the status quo. We must become historical renovators. We must be willing to tear up the floorboards of our own assumptions. We must actively look for the talent, the brilliance, and the character that has been historically stranded on the western bank of the river, and we must deliberately build new bridges to reach it. To do this, we have to look closely at the actual tangible damage caused by the slope in the floor. We must move beyond theory and examine exactly what happens when millions of well-intentioned people allow the gravity of history to dictate their choices. We must trace the real-world ripples of disadvantage. Chapter 10. The Real-World Ripples of Disadvantage. Imagine two brothers sitting side by side in a dimly lit living room, intensely focused on a fast-paced, highly competitive video game. They have spent years playing against one another. They are equally matched in intelligence, their reflexes are identical, and their determination to win is absolute. But there is a secret, invisible flaw in the setup of this particular match. One of the controllers has a microscopic, mechanical glitch. It possesses a split-second delay. It is barely perceptible, just a tiny fraction of a second of lag between the moment the younger brother presses a button and the moment his character actually reacts on the screen. Over the course of a 10-minute match, this tiny delay means the brother with the faulty controller misses a crucial jump. He loses a split-second duel. He fails to dodge an incoming attack. When the final score flashes across the screen, the brother with the perfect controller throws his hands up in triumph, genuinely believing his victory is purely the result of superior skill and relentless practice. The brother who lost slumps his shoulders, quietly internalizing the defeat, wondering if he is simply losing his touch. Neither of them realizes the profound truth of the situation. The final outcome was not decided by the talent of the players, but by the silent, unacknowledged mechanics of the hardware. This invisible lag is the exact mechanism of systemic disadvantage in the real world. We are deeply conditioned to look at the final scoreboards of life, wealth, career success, education, and health, and assume they are purely the result of individual effort. We desperately want to believe that life is a perfectly fair game where hard work always guarantees victory. But this belief requires us to completely ignore the invisible, compounding delays built into the controllers of millions of human beings. To see how these delays echo through a real life, picture two young entrepreneurs. Both are dreaming of opening a small, vibrant neighborhood business. Let us say they are both pouring their entire souls into the project. They are working 80 hours a week, personally building the wooden furniture for the shop by hand, carefully agonizing over the perfect color combinations for the walls, and staying up long past midnight researching the bulk prices of essential ingredients like sugar and cooking oil just to make the tight financial margins work. Their work ethic is identical. Their passion is entirely equal. Now they both walk into the same bank to secure a crucial renovation loan. The first entrepreneur happens to fit the demographic profile that the bank's loan officer unconsciously associates with safety, competence, and success. The loan officer's brain, relying on the comfortable shortcuts we explored earlier, instantly drops this applicant into the reliable file. The conversation flows easily. The officer extends the benefit of the doubt on a missing piece of paperwork, offers a highly favorable interest rate, and approves the loan quickly. This entrepreneur receives an invisible tailwind. They open on time, buy high-quality equipment, and immediately begin generating a profit. The second entrepreneur, possessing the exact same business plan and the exact same relentless drive, walks into the office. But this individual belongs to a group that the loan officer's unconscious mind, shaped by decades of skewed cultural programming, associates with higher risk. The officer's brain hesitates. That tiny stutter of the mind occurs. Suddenly, the officer requires extra documentation. They scrutinize the business plan with intense skepticism. They ultimately approve the loan, but at a significantly higher interest rate with a larger required down payment. This is the microscopic delay in the controller. It does not look like overt, screaming hatred. It looks like a slightly higher interest rate. It looks like a slightly delayed opening. It looks like starting a business with heavier debt. 10 years later, the first entrepreneur has expanded to 3 locations and is celebrated in the local community as a visionary. The second entrepreneur is still working 80 hours a week, exhausted, barely keeping the original shop afloat under the crushing weight of the accumulated debt. Society looks at these two individuals and effortlessly concludes that the first one is simply a harder worker, a smarter investor, or a better leader. The structural delay, the invisible headwind, is entirely erased from the narrative. The second entrepreneur might even look in the mirror and believe the failure is entirely their own fault. This is the ultimate heartbreaking cost of our unexamined biases. Disadvantage is not merely a historical event that happened in the distant past. It is a living, breathing, compounding mathematical reality. When an unconscious assumption alters a split-second decision in a classroom, a courtroom, or a boardroom, it creates a ripple. And when millions of these tiny, biased decisions occur every single day, those ripples combine to form massive, overwhelming waves that can alter the entire trajectory of a human life. We cannot simply wish away these waves. We cannot cure the human brain of its biological need to categorize, and we cannot instantly erase the historical weight of the world we inherited. But we are not powerless. The journey we have taken through the hidden architecture of the mind leads to a single, undeniable conclusion. Awareness is the ultimate catalyst for change. The blind spot is only dangerous when it remains hidden in the dark. Once you know it is there, once you understand how your brain paints over the missing pieces of reality, how it forcefully categorizes strangers, and how it quietly favors the familiar, you possess the power to interrupt the machine. You have the profound capacity to catch yourself in the microscopic gap between an automatic instinct and a physical action. You can feel the urge to tighten your grip, to dismiss the unfamiliar resume, or to assume the worst, and you can consciously choose to let that impulse pass. You can look at the people standing outside the spotlight of your own tribe and actively, deliberately invite them into the warmth. You can design your life, your workplace, and your community with structural guardrails that protect human potential from the flawed mechanics of human judgment. We are not perfect creatures. We will never possess minds that are entirely free of friction. But the goal of a meaningful life is not biological perfection. It is moral responsibility. We are called to be the generation that stops trusting the automatic reflexes of the past and starts doing the hard, beautiful, conscious work of building a world where every single player, no matter where they come from, finally holds a controller that works. The invisible is now visible. The machine has been exposed. The rest of the story belongs entirely to you.